Hello, welcome to Urinary 1. This is part 3 in the Urinary 1 podcast. This is gross anatomy. So if you look at the left side of the screen, you can see our heroes, the kidneys. And then, of course, the red structures going into the kidneys. That's the renal artery, and the blue structure coming out is the renal vein. The adrenal gland sits on top of the kidney. And then you can see from the kidneys, the right and left kidney, you see two ureters coming out of the kidney that will carry the urine to the urinary bladder, and then from the urinary bladder, the urine will be excreted out of the urethra. Now, then it says the bottom of the cartoon, the kidneys lies approximately between T12, so thoracic rib 12, and thoracic vertebrae 12, and lumbar vertebrae number 3. And the ribs help protect the kidneys a little bit, but not the whole kidney. And then the right kidney you can see is a little bit lower than the left kidney because the liver, which is it's not in this cartoon, but the liver sits on the right side of the body. So in this cartoon, this would probably be a coronal section through the kidney. And if we start just looking at it sort of on face and most superficially, we see that on the very outside of the kidney there's a renal capsule, so that's a connective tissue. So it's got some collagen and elastin that will sort of hold the kidney's shape and protect it a little bit. Then if you go deep from the renal capsule, you find this area called the renal cortex. So that's the outer sort of rind of the kidney. And then generally deep to the renal cortex is the renal medulla. But this is where people get confused. So the two big structures are the renal cortex, most superficial, and then the renal medulla, which is deeper in the kidney. But then within the renal medulla itself, there are many structures. So within the renal medulla lives a renal pyramid, and then between the renal pyramids, where the cortex dives into the medulla, those are called renal columns. So the renal columns separate the renal pyramids, but both of those structures live in the renal medulla. In the renal pyramid, we'll look at this microscopically, but that's where the urine is made. And once the urine is made, it filters into these calyces. So initially, urine comes out of the renal papilla, which the renal papilla is just the tip of the renal pyramid. So the urine comes out of the renal papilla and goes into a minor calyx, and then several minor calyces drain into a major calyx, and then several major calyces drain into the structure called the renal pelvis, and then from the renal pelvis the urine is taken to the ureter, and then eventually to the bladder, and then out the urethra. Okay, so this is a cartoon of the male urinary system on the left side and the female urinary system on the right side. So let's look at the male on the left first. At the top of the diagram, you can see there's a parietal peritoneum. So remember the visceral and parietal theme. So the parietal peritoneum would be holding the bladder, which is what the parietal peritoneum is on top of, would be holding it to the wall of the pelvic cavity. So then you can also see the two ureters that would come from the kidneys. Two ureters go into the bladder. When you look inside the bladder, like cross-section of the bladder, you see these structures called rugae. Those increase the surface area of the bladder. So when the bladder fills with urine, it can expand easily because these rugae will flatten out. Also, the muscle that surrounds the bladder is called the detrusor muscle, and it's made up of smooth muscle cells. Also within the bladder, there are the ureteral openings, so that's where both ureters enter into the bladder. And then the floor of the bladder is called the trigone, and that's an important clinical area because bladder infections tend to persist in the trigone. From the bladder, you go to the internal urethral sphincter, so that is an involuntary sphincter. You don't have control over that. That will release when the bladder gets full. And it's a sphincter, so what kind of muscle would that be? Hopefully you said smooth muscle cell. Z. Okay, and then in the male, there's 3 different regions to the urethra that takes urine from the bladder to the external environment. There is the prostatic urethra, because it's called that because it's the part of the urethra that goes through the prostate gland. And when men get prostate gland swelling, it compresses that prostatic urethra and makes it hard for them to micturate, or aka urinate. From the prostatic urethra, the urethra passes through the urogenital diaphragm, and that part of the urethra is called the membranous urethra. It's a really short part of the urethra. And then the largest part of the urethra in the males is called the penile urethra because it passes through the length of the penis. And then there's an external urethral orifice. And let me back up. In the urogenital diaphragm, where you have the prostatic urethra, there's also an external urethral sphincter, and that is skeletal muscle, so you can control that sphincter. And then the female on the right-hand side of the cartoon has all the same structures. It just doesn't have the female has a urethra, but the female doesn't have a prostatic, membranous, and penile urethra. Okay. Now this is this would be a cross section about the level of the kidney to show you the different layers or structures that surround the kidney. So it looks like it's kind of a mess, and there's a lot of things you don't have to know in this cartoon. But if you find the kidney, so where it's written kidney, and follow that line to show where the kidney is, it's kind of that salmon colored thing, and then you can see the medullary pyramids in the kidney. So if you find that structure, and then so then let's go from the kidney outward more superficially and find our renal capsule that we talked about a couple slides ago. The renal capsule is made of collagen and elastin, but superficial to the renal capsule, there's a thin layer of fat, and then superficial to that thin layer of fat is the renal fascia. So fascia is, again, that's a sort of a tougher collagen, mostly collagen connective tissue to enclose the kidney. So from most superficial, we have the renal fascia, and then we have a little bit of fat, and then we have the renal capsule, and then we have the kidney. In addition, well, I told you there is that layer of fat. They actually call it the adipose capsule. So there's ways to, besides the ribs, there's ways to protect the kidney, and that's through a capsule and a fascia that has collagen in it, and then also an adipose capsule that has fat in it. Kidneys are what's known as a retroperitoneal organ, so that means they live outside the peritoneal cavity. And because the adrenal glands are on top of the kidney, they're also retroperitoneal, as are the ureters and the urinary bladder. And then here I told you that the kidneys are protected by the fascia, the adipose capsule, and a renal capsule.